All right, so what are we creating? We are creating a backend of application which is about booking an appointment between an patient and a doctor. So I have three APIs here: patient API, doctor API, and another one is appointments API. Patient API stores patient information, or you can manipulate patient information from this API. Doctor API talks about or gives you um, operations on how to manage a doctor. Okay, so put, post, get, delete. And then appointment API is how you book the appointment between a doctor and a patient. So when a user comes, so idea is that when a user comes to a page and he wishes to book an appointment, he will select the patient, he will select the doctor, he will select the date and time, he will select the clinic, all any other details, and then he will click on book appointment. When he click on a button book appointment, appointments API will get called, and then appointments API will go and check whether that patient is available. Then it will check if that doctor is available, and if both of them are available or already registered in the system, then it will book the appointment, return the details. But if it is not present, if the patient is not present in the system, or if the doctor is not registered in the system, then the appointments appointment will not be booked, and there will be a error thrown. So this is the functionality is what I am going to talk about today. I have implemented this small snippet of this whole flow of in the appointments API, but I also made some changes in the doctor and patient API as well. Okay, so this is the goal of today's session, where I will show you how I have done it. And another piece for today is I would like to introduce a continuous integration, continuous deployment tool called as GitLab. So we will be moving our things from GitHub to GitLab, because we want to make use of the out of the box feature of GitLab, where you can really build and run tests and all those things from within the pipeline. So I will show you that also how to do it. So these are the two things which I will talk about today. Okay, so let's first start with the patient API. So the patient API, I think you already know what it is. And yesterday, if you remember, we did some security configurations, right? So we use Spring security, and we use something called the HTTP basic. And now my API, which is patient API, is secured using basic authentication. So I'm simply saying here that these are the endpoints with the, I've also mentioned the methods here. These are the endpoints. If they are being accessed with a specific HTTP verb, they are permitted. That means no authentication will be asked. But if someone tries to post, delete, or put, then there will be a authentication. Okay, this is what basically I implemented yesterday. And to do that, I have actually managed to put some users here. These are the users which are required to for post, post, delete, and put. And for get, it's all there's no problem. Okay, to do that, it's quite simple. All I've done is I'm just giving you a summary of what we did yesterday. Okay, so this is what we did. We just added a class. We marked this as annotation as @configuration, and then we said @enable web security, and then we also had to put some dependency in the POM. So I put dependency as Spring Boot starter security, and that's it. And this is the simplest way you can implement Spring security or put some authentication authorization mechanism to your API. But I have only done this for patient API. I have not done this for others. Eventually we will have to do this for all, and even maybe later we will put all this, even get and post and everything inside the authentication umbrella. Okay, so this is what we will implement later, but for today this is what we have. Patient API, more or less it looks same, nothing changed other than the security part. I also added a small init database endpoint, so that every time I start this application, I don't want to go and create it from the Swagger. I will just simply click this endpoint and it will create some data for me. Okay, next I did is The same thing in doctor APIs. If I go to doctor's API, I will go here. This is my entity. In the controller also, I have added the same endpoint, something like this. One more change I did is added another endpoint called as search by email. This was not there previously, but I just yesterday added this because I wanted to hit this endpoint from appointments API to search and doctor by email just to check whether the doctor is available in the system. That's the reason I did this. And then next is the same thing, rather the same thing I did in the controller here. Same thing I did here, search by email, patient search by email. And all it does is internally it goes here and it runs this repository method find by email, which I wrote explicitly. And this is what it uses to retrieve the any patient with that specific email. And this is called from this endpoint called as patient search by email. And similar to that, I have another which is doctor search by email. Fine. Okay, so these are the changes I did here. Then I'll go to appointments API, which is this one. And this is where I made most of my changes, which I would like to talk about today. Okay, if I go to my controller, it looks something like this. So I have only two endpoints implemented at the moment. One is the create endpoint, another is the get endpoint. And the get endpoint, it's quite simple. All I'm doing is fetching all the appointments from the database. I'm simply saying find all, return everything. Okay, so this is no rocket science. Second, I am implementing is post mapping. The endpoint here is @/appointment. And here is what I tried making a lot of the changes. So here if you say create appointment, request body appointment entity, and it is throwing two specific exceptions. So here I've tried introducing few more concepts. It's not only about creating appointment, but I have tried to put some concepts on how to handle the exceptions using something called as advice. This advice is what I added here, but I think I have already explained this in the previous sessions. But the advice is what you use to handle errors from within your code. So it is how you centrally control the error. So as simple as that, it's a handler basically which makes sure whatever your application is throwing, can be controlled from a single point, from single place in the whole code, so that it's not scattered across different controllers and different endpoint, different methods. And I'll show you that in a while. Okay, so it returns patient not found exception, doctor not found exception. These are two exceptions which I created them under exceptions here. Okay, now let me first go here to create new appointment. So whenever someone clicks on create appointment, it opens it goes into the method create new appointment. And what we have here is, let me make it a bit bigger. Okay, so for creation of a new appointment, what do we have to do? So whenever someone wishes to create an appointment, we need to do few checks first. Okay, what is those checks? The first check is we need to see whether a patient is present or not. I mean, imagine from the user perspective, imagine there is a page. Okay, and then that page you have let's say four fields. First, and let's say it's a drop down. The first drop down is a patient. Second drop down is a doctor, list of doctor. Or let's say it's a text box, or imagine it's a text box. So patient, doctor, then you have a date and time to which you wanted to book an appointment, and then you want to click on a button called as book appointment. When book appointment is clicked, this method will be called. And when you come to this method, you need to first check whether that patient is there or not, right? So we need to see whether the patient for which you are trying to book an appointment, is it there? But the patient information is not present in appointments API. Appointments API is all about appointments API. There is no information about whether the patient is present or not. It doesn't store any of that. So, and that is how microservices work, right? So when that information is present, where that information is present in the patient API. Now, all that patient information is present here, but you want to access that information in appointments API, because this is the method which has been called. So now it is responsibility of this method to make a call or to inquire about that patient information to the patient API. So this method has to make a call. It has to make a call to patient API with the ask that I want to see if this email is present with you. Do you have this email ID? Do you have this patient register? And if it is yes, then continue to the next check, which is the doctor available, or is the doctor exist in the system? Is the doctor exist in the system? So this is the next check which has to be done. Okay, so this will be the next check. So here the first check is patient entity exists and doctor entity exists. These two checks are mandatory for to create an appointment. So these are the two methods I have added. How I have implemented this, let me explain. So I have this method called as is patient exists, which is here. So this is my method is patient exists, and what I'm passing here is entity.get patient email. This is what I'm getting here. This is the whole object which I'm getting. So entity.get patient email. Fine, and this will send call this method is patient exists with the email ID. And here see what I'm trying to do. So I'm trying to create a URL first, because I want to hit this patient API, and this API has to be running somewhere. At the moment you are seeing this everything running inside this project, but eventually these APIs will be running as a separate services, separate APIs. To access a certain API, a certain RESTful API, which is accessible only on HTTP, you have to have a URL for it. So I have to create a URL first. So how I am creating URL? I am saying URL, and then I'm saying patient API host. I need to know which host it is deployed to. I need to know the port on which it listens, and then I need to put an endpoint. This is my endpoint, and I am simply saying email equal to email as a query parameter. Okay, where I'm getting this from? If I go to my patient API, which is this one, if you see, this is the exact endpoint I have here, right? So I'm saying patient search by email, and then it accepts a request param with the string as email, right? So this is a query parameter. And if I go back again where I was earlier, which is appointment service here. So here, this is exactly what I'm calling patient search by email. Question mark is how you pass something called as query parameter. Query parameter is always in a key value pair. So this is my key email, and this is my value email, which is coming from here. So my endpoint, this is how I'm building my endpoint. And from where these are coming, these are something which I have defined in the application YAML. So I've written here externals. I've created my own user defined variable. I'm simply saying externals, and this I have written APIs, and I have mentioned the URLs for the details of these two APIs. I'm saying Doctor API host and port, Doctor API patient API host and port. And right now, since I know this will only, I'm running this from local machine. So I'm simply saying HTTP localhost. And for patient API also, I'm saying HTTP localhost, but however, the ports are different. So this is running on 8082, this is running on 8083, and this is what I mentioned here. How will I access these values? I will have to go to my place where I am using them. I have created these variables like this, and then I have annotated this with @value. This is what Spring gives me, and then I have to put something like this in this format $, and then I have to put curly braces, open and close, and inside this I have to give the object model. So I'm seeing externals APIs patient API host, externals APIs patient API port. So externals APIs Doctor API host, externals APIs Doctor API port. Okay, and this is how basically I'm accessing these variables. Here it will automatically be mapped with that value will be fetched, and that is the value I am actually using here to make my URL. So it will be patient API host, then colon patient API port slash the endpoint against which I want to hit, and then email, query parameterized email, and the value. Okay, this is what basically I'm doing. Now The same thing I'm doing here is doctor exists, but here the URL will be different, right? So I'm saying URL is equal to doctors API, doctor API port, and then the endpoint. The same endpoint I have in doctors API also, which I explain in a while. I mean, like 5 minutes back. If I go to controller, you see I have endpoint doctors search by email, and this gives me the values like this. Get doctors by email. So find email by ID. This is the one, and it brings me back it queries the database and brings me any entity with this specific email ID. And this is my endpoint. But from appointments API perspective, all I need is what is the endpoint against which I will get my data. So appointments API will call this endpoint. It's a get endpoint. It will say doctor search by email, and it will will return the list of doctors which it finds with that specific email. Okay, I'll go back now to appointments API here. Sorry, to service. Okay, so this is how I'm building the URLs. Fine. Okay, what's next? The next thing is, I'll explain this in a while, but let's go and check this line. This is exactly what is you had seen earlier when I tried doing this. So when we were learning things from employee what we call it, employee APIs, on which we were learning as Spring things, I use this class called as REST template. And REST template is what you can use to access external APIs which runs or which responds on HTTP. So REST template is what you can use to hit that any endpoint, and it will give you the result. You can use it for get, post, put, delete, anything. But this specific method here, it was embedded in the method name itself. It's a get. So all we were doing here was REST template dot get for entity. We are trying to get an entity. Then we hit this endpoint, and then the result of this was mapped to object.class. Okay, this is what we did when we were doing the employee entity. Let me basically show that to give you a perspective. So I'm here now. Okay, this is the one. So here we had this service REST template. Inside this we had this method, and this is what we were doing earlier. Let me see if I can run this to show you. If I run this, is it done? 9,000. Okay, if I go back to my URL, localhost 9,000 swagger. Fine. So this is my pet store. I'm simply saying available, execute, and this has brought all this from where? From the endpoint, which is this one. Okay, this is the endpoint, and if I go back to my URL, this is where it was. So I actually hit this API. I will show you this API also. This was an external API which I actually hit, and I actually called this one, this endpoint basically. Oh no, I think this one. Okay, I can also see what endpoint I have called, right? I'm just showing you few tricks and techniques how you can check what is being called. You can go to inspect, you can click on network. From there you can know what call this browser is making. So let me quickly do this. Okay, and then if I go here, try it out, I say whatever, click on execute. So from here you can see there must be a call. Okay, wait, let me put available, or let me refresh it so that I don't get unnecessary calls to the network. Say try it out, I say available, click on execute, and this is the endpoint it make. And here Let me go back here. Okay, let me see if I could show you some in response. So this is the response which it got, and this is what it is actually showing here. Okay, so from internally, the API made a call to this specific endpoint here, and that you can also check from here. I think you can actually go and see somewhere here. You see, this is what this is the state. This is the call this employee API made in order to reach and get data from this API. And here, if you see, I use the same thing. I used REST template, which is this one, get for entity. And here I have just hit this endpoint. And object.class represents once whatever this thing returns, I need to map that, because on HTTP, when you get things or when you send things on HTTP over internet, you send things in a text format, right? And the text format, mostly we use JSON. Right, so when you make that call and what you get in return is a JSON, right? This is what you got in a text format. But then you have to map it to your Java specific object model. And this is what I'm doing here. But here I am just too generic. I'm doing just too generic thing. I'm simply saying whatever is returned, just map it to object.class, which is a parent of all the classes in Java. So this is what I'm doing, object.class, and it will just map all of this to the object of class. Sorry, object of type object.class. Okay, and here I was just returning the value of it. So I'm simply saying response entity get body, and I'm converting all of that into a string, and then it is kind of printing the result. It was printing a result here, something like this, or rather something like this, because I've converted all of that into a string. Okay, why I'm telling you all this? Because I wanted to set a context of what we learned last time. We learned this REST template and how to make a call using REST template object. And exactly the same topic, same concept I am right now using for appointments. So I'm saying, let me go back again. So here in the patient exists, I'm using what? I'm saying REST template. Let me make distinction between these two statements. So I'm saying response entity REST template dot exchange, right? Previously I was using REST template get for entity. Okay, so when you do that, you don't have to mention any verb or anything else. You just say get for entity, and this will be assumed as a get request. But I'm using more generic approach here, which is REST template dot exchange. This is a method I'm calling. I'm passing URL, which I created here, and then I have to say HTTP method dot get because I'm doing a get request. Now this is where you pass any entity with the request. Since I have a get, I will not do it. Usually you use this for posts. When you create a post request, then you do that. I'm just simply saying get, so I'm just passing null here. And then I am passing something called as parameterized type reference. So what is this? This is what I was explaining about here. This is what once things, whatever it is your API is returning, your API call is returning, you need to map it with an existing Java object model so that you can fetch and manipulate the values from it easily. Because if everything is a string, it's hard to get value. So you need to map whatever is being written. Whatever is being written is always will be in a string format, and then you have to map it. Of course, in the string format, it will also have a JSON format. So JSON embedded within a string, and then this is how you map. This is the place where you put something which will map your JSON sent as a text. You will map it with something called as Java object model, which you already would have created in your API. So if I go back here to explain, okay, so this is my parameterized type reference. This is what is my object here, and how I have defined this. I have written parameterized type reference list of patient entity. Why I'm doing this? Because this endpoint patient search by email, if I go back to my patient here, search by email, this returns me a list of patient. It returns me a list of patient, right? So the same thing I will have to do here. I have to say list of patient entity. Now, why this class is different? Because this is not the same class which is present here. This is the class which I have also created here, because I cannot, from here I cannot access the class of this one, because these will be separate APIs eventually. So I cannot access each other's classes. So I have to create the same duplicate class which was present here. This class I have copied and pasted and marked this and renamed it as patient entity, present inside appointments API. Okay, I'll go back. So this is what I've written: list of patient entity, and then list, and the same name, because I'm creating a new object of parameterized type reference, and I'm simply say list of patient entity, and I will not do anything else. I'll just leave it as it is, and that's it. So I will just copy this and paste it here. That's it. So this is how REST template know that whatever this exchange will return, it will have to be converted to a list of patient entity. So now I have converted this response entity return type into a response entity list of patient entity. Okay, and then it is very easy for me to look and manipulate that JSON which is being returned, because now I have this in a object format, object model. By the way, all I'm doing at this moment, after it's returned, all I'm doing is simply I'm checking whether whatever is returned is not empty. Because if something is written, I'm simply saying search by email as email. If email, whatever email I've sent, if it doesn't exist, this will give me body as empty. It will return me an empty body. I will show you in a debug mode later. It will return me an empty body, and that would mean that this email does not exist. Okay, and then this method is patient exist will return me a false. So I've used a exclamation mark which says negate whatever this returns, opposite of it. So if this is empty, I'm simply saying negate it. Empty means it's this will, if it's empty, it will return me true because it's empty. And then I am reversing this saying false, because my name of the method is patient exists. So I want to return false when the patient does not exist. I want to return true if the patient exists. So this is the logic for it. So I'm saying is patient exist. If patient does not exist, it will return as empty. This statement will be false. I will convert this to true, and that is what I would send. Okay, something like that. So if I return this is patient exist, it will come here. Is patient exist? If patient exists, it will say true. If patient does not exist, it will say false. Patient exists. If it is true, that means whatever REST template returned had something in the body. That means something was returned. That means that specific email was returned, and that will give me the confidence to say yes, the patient exists. Okay, guys, give me a minute. Okay, sorry. I'll explain this in a while, but let me explain the logic of is doctor exists is exactly the same what we have done for the patient API. So doctor API host, doctor API port is defined in the application.yaml here, and then the same thing, list of doctor entity, because my REST template will now return me list of doctor entity. So I'm saying REST template dot exchange. I'm saying URL method as get null parameterized type reference, which is this object. This means it is returning a list of doctor entity. The response entity body will automatically be transformed into list of doctor entity, and that's it. However, I'm not getting much out of conversion, because all I'm doing is just to check whether it's there or not. I'm simply saying response entity dot get body is empty. The same logic. If it is empty, it means it will return true, but I want to return false if something is empty. So I'm negating it like this. putting an exclamation mark which says negate whatever you're returning, and then I will return false or true based on what is the content of get body. So exactly the same logic. Okay, so I'm here now. So I'm saying patient exists, doctor exists. So first check is, does patient exist? Next check is, does doctor exist? If both of them exist, it will not go into this block. But if any one of them does not exist, then I want to throw an exception, because then I don't want to go ahead. I want to throw an exception saying, hey, this specific patient did not is not present in the system, or this specific doctor is not present in the system. So these are the two statements I want to send back once there is a problem with the appointment booking. But how did I implement this? I could have implemented in a very plain vanilla way. I could simply would have said, okay, return an exception. In the exception, I could have written a message, hey, this is an exception. And then I have to configure something, some status code somewhere here in the controller. I would to say, okay, the patient is not there, this is exception, then throw this specific status code, because currently everything succeeds, it returns 200, nothing succeeds, it returns 500. But what if I have to return a status code as not found? So I want to return a status code as not found, and I want to return some meaningful message to the caller, and all that I would have to configure here in the controller. But there is a better way of doing it. This is what I'm going to explain next. It is to be done using something called as handler, which I was explaining in the beginning. Exception handler takes the form of advice. We call this advice in Spring Boot, and this is something very similar to, if you have heard about listeners, it listens to whatever is being sent, and then it transforms it. It captures it and it transforms it. Okay, so kind of a, not a listener, let's say interceptor. Okay, because it intercepts what is being written. So let me go back to service here. This is what I want to call if nothing is returned, or if there is no patient. If there is nothing to return and there is no patient, I want to simply say, if patient does not exist, then throw an exception. Throw exception as throw new patient not found exception. How did I come to put this here? Because I have created an exception like this here. This is how you can create your custom or predefined or custom defined exceptions. All you have to do is to extend, you create a class, give it a meaningful name, and then extends it to exception, which is a parent of all exceptions in Java. And then you simply call a constructor, and then you call the constructor of the parent, super exception. Okay, and this is how you implement or create an exception. It's plain simple, no rocket science. So I have created these two exceptions: doctor not found exception, patient not found exception, with the same very similar implementations. Okay, I'll go back to my appointment service. Here I'm saying throw new patient not found exception, and then I'm passing a text here. This text is what is sent here in the string exception. Okay, this is what I am putting here. So I'm saying throw new patient not found exception, and the patient with email as this does not exist in the system. Please register this patient first. This is what I'm saying here. And here, same thing, doctor not found exception. Doctor with email as entity.get doctor email does not exist in the system. Please register this doctor first. Fine. So this is plain statements. Of course, there is more to implement here. But I am only checking two things. But I need to check one more thing. Maybe if time permits, I will show you that. But these are the only two changes, or only two checks, not changes. Checks is what I am doing at the moment to before I book an appointment. But I need to do more. Why? Because I need to see whether the patient is available or not. Patient has come to book an appointment, but is doctor available at this specific time? The availability of the doctor. Then I also have to see, is patient has all existing appointment, or doctor has existing appointment, and then is doctor available that day, because doctor don't sit in on every days, all the days. So I have to put all those checks also here. So this is where I would have to put more checks. And that is what I would expect you guys to do. But for now, I'm simply showing these two checks. I will put more checks here and publish it in the repository so that you can refer it. But you should also try to put these checks on your own, and that is where your learning begins. Okay, so try doing that. Anyway, now throw new patient not found exception, doctor not found exception is what it is throwing. This will be thrown back via the same endpoint. So I'm saying create appointment, and this throws patient not found exception, doctor not found exception. Okay, but these will not be thrown just like that to the caller. This will be intercepted, and this interception happens with the advice here. Okay, so this exception handler is what I have added here. If you notice, I have added something called as @controller advice, and this is the place from where you can centrally control what kind of exceptions your API throws and how to transform it before you could actually send it back to the customer, so that the customer gets some meaning out of it. Sometimes if you just throw plain exceptions, it will be very complicated. The whole Java trace is being sent with very weird error messages, and the user will, or the caller will not be able to understand or comprehend what is the problem, what problem was caused. But it's your responsibility as an API developer to put a meaningful error messages or do meaningful error handling. And to do that in Spring Boot, you use controller advice. As I said, this is an exception handler basically. In few other frameworks, it's also called as interceptor. So you intercept what you want to send and you transform it, only then you send it back. This is what I'm doing here. I'm saying here that handle doctor not found exception. So this is a method I created, and here I'm saying doctor not found exception. Why I'm saying this here? And I also put here under exception handler doctor not found exception dot class. So I'm saying whenever any controller means any controller which is present here, any controller, any endpoint throws an exception which is of type doctor not found, then automatically call this method. Don't return anything, just first come here and return what is written, what is located here. So as soon as doctor not found exception is called, this method will automatically be invoked, and then I have an option to transform it. And the way I'm transforming this is I have created my own class custom error method. I'm putting timestamp, I'm putting message, I'm putting details. Okay, so in the here I'm filling the details. I'm saying error details, new dates, I'm putting a timestamp. Then I'm saying exception.get message. So the message of the exception, what is present inside it, that, and some description, request.get description. We'll come to that later. What is relevant for us right now is get message. This is the message which will be sent when you call this, or when this is being called. So patient with email, this is the message which will be set here under get message. Okay, I mean, you can do a lot of things here. You can make your error message really more verbose, with more details there. I have just kept messages and date and description. That's it. And description anyway is coming from requests, which I am not really doing anything about. Spring Boot handles it. Okay, but this is the syntax of how you need to do. Then if this method is called, I have to return something. So I'm saying return new response entity. So I want to return a response entity with this object, and I want to return error details, which is this. And then I want to send HTTP status as HTTP status not found. So whenever a doctor not found exception is called, or whenever a patient not found exception is called, this is how I handle it. You can have your own custom defined things. I mean, you can put one for just for exception. So instead of your controller sending any kind of exception, you can simply say something like this. So these are two exceptions, and I will say any exception and simply say exception, something like this here. So if it is not falling under any of these exception classes, if only it's a generic exception, it's not falling under what I've already defined, then this method will be called automatically, and it will return the status codes and all those things. So the point is, you do not handle, I mean, I can show you here which what we have done earlier. I'm simply putting response status as this, created, okay, all those things, right? I do not really have to do all of that. And because if there is any exception being thrown, I'm not capturing it, I'm sending it to user as it is. This is not a good practice. Good practice is that you create an advice, controller advice, something like this, and you handle everything within the same class so that you don't have to clutter or manage things into your controllers. You can directly handle everything from just single class called an exception handler. This is the use case importance of why you need to use a controller advice. So my, so to say, advice to you, all of you, is whatever API you are creating from now onwards, or even whatever you created so far, implement advices there. Don't do or clutter your controllers with your status codes and handler and exception handlers and all those things. Do everything at the central single point here in a single class, and put and create generic exceptions, because this becomes easy for your API to know what error was occurred and what kind of message I need to pass. I mean, you can only put exception here, fine, but this will not be very useful. It will not really tell exactly what happened, etc., etc. Okay, so it's better you create your own exceptions for different kind of errors which you foresee, which you think you may get, and then you configure them into your controller advice. Okay, fine. Now is the time for demo. Let me show you how all this works. Okay, so for that to work, let me comment this out because I don't want this to happen at the moment. Let me simply run my 3 APIs. Okay, so I will run my appointment API. Then I will run my patient API. And then I will run my doctor API, doctor app. Fine, all APIs up and running. Now let's see their Swagger. So I'll go back here. Let me remove this. I will say 8081. And I will say Swagger UI. This is my appointment API up and running. Then I will say 82. This is my doctor API up and running. And I will say 83. This is my patient API up and running. Right now, if I do a get, I get nothing because there is nothing here. So I will have to first initialize. I would like to initialize things. So I will say try it out, execute. This will create some data, and I will do the same thing here. Try it out. It will create some data. When I do a get here, I have 3 patients details. So Akash, Amit, and Sumit. There are 3 patients. I have different emails for all these 3 patients. Okay, that means I have 3 patients in the system, registered in the system. If I go back to doctors, try it out, I have 3 doctors, Dr. Korsin, Dr. Carola, Dr. Jami. So I have these 3 doctors available here. Fine, with different details of it. Fine, okay, good. So I have my doctors, I have my patients. Now I have to book my appointment. So if I go to post appointment, I go and give it a try. So I'll say try it out, and I simply don't do change anything. I say I want to book x@x.com. I say execute. So now I will get a status code as 404. Patient with email, this does not exist in the system because of course it's not there. There's no patient with the name email as x.x.com, right? So you won't be able to create anything, but the error is quite clear to me. Timestamp message details, this is coming from here. Timestamp message details, because in the exception handler, what internally really is happening is it has checked if the patient exists. It had made a call. It has made a call using this template. It has made a call, and that call has went to the patient API, which is actually this one. It has actually made a call internally to patient API and checked whether there is anything with x.x.com and couldn't find it, and it returned a 404. Why did it return 404? Because that is what I have mentioned here. As soon as there's a problem, return patient not found exception. It will be captured here, patient not found exception. It will capture the error messages, exception message here, put that into a object called as custom error detail, which I have created on my own here. And then I am returning that details, but I'm returning the whole object, but I'm also saying http dot not found, which is actually 404. This is what I have. Oops, sorry, what did I do? Okay, this is what I have received here, 404 not found, and I'm saying timestamp patient with email, this does not exist. Okay, what if I do the right thing? So what if I say Akash at the rate akash.com. So this time patient is present, this email is present there. If I say execute, but a doctor email is a string, so now it will say it has accepted, yeah, it has found that Akash is there, but now it couldn't find the doctor. Doctor with email string does not exist in the system. Please register this doctor first. So do I have valid doctor? I think I do. So if I go to my get execute, I have this doctor, so I will put this doctor there. In my appointment, I will say this execute, and that's it. So now my appointment is booked because it has found doctor, it has found patient, and then it is able to do. I was supposed to do some more validations, right? If I go to appointment service, I've only checked two things. I have to check whether is there any appointment at the specific date and time. Is patient available? Is doctor available? I haven't done those checks, right? So I need to do those checks also, which I insist you guys do on your own. I will of course do it, and I will share the code, but I would like you guys to try on your own how to create or how to check whether the appointment and the date and all those things is present there. So try things on your own, and eventually if you see I'm just doing the save means insert query, which I'm doing once the checks are passed. Any check, if there is any check which is not passed, I simply throw exception. You can do the same things. You can create your own exceptions, saying doctor not available exception, which you will throw if doctor is not available. So these kind of exceptions you can actually go and create here.